Not have been clearer. Donald Trump is now in charge at Justice.
Our predecessors turned this Department of Justice into the Department of Injustice, but I stand before you today to declare that those days are over, and they are never going to come back. They're never coming back. So now, as the chief law enforcement officer in our country, I will insist upon and demand full and complete accountability for the wrongs and abuses that have occurred.
As chief law enforcement officer of our country,
Congressman Kinzinger, to see him at the Department of Justice in front of that crowd, what did you make of it?
It's chilling. I mean, I think he was sending a very clear message, which is, this is my Department of Justice. He didn't come right out and say, hey, I'm going to direct you guys to go prosecute these people. But he would talk. I saw with, like, Cannon, he said, you know, there were people that went after, I don't know if it was illegal, but it was certainly. So he's sending a very chilling message. And the other interesting thing is what you see in there are, he's kind of giving a forgiving attitude to DOJ, in essence saying, look, from here out, you guys are my people, good to go. Let's talk about what old DOJ did. And in the process of that, you heard people applauding. You'd hear people applaud when he'd mention the name of the FBI director or whatever. And it was very creepy. And this is something that I think Americans, regardless of your political position, should really be worried about.
Ellie, I mean, you know the Department of Justice. You worked at the Department of Justice for many years. Have you ever seen something like this?
No, Anderson. What happened today, that speech was a desecration of the Justice Department, of the Great Hall of Justice, where it was given. AGs and occasionally presidents of both parties have used that room for decades to address the rank and file, like I once was, to call on the highest principles of DOJ. The person who that building is named after is Robert F. Kennedy, Sr., to be clear. And just to give a sense of the type of speech that ordinarily gets given by an AG to prosecutors, I pulled this. I just want to read real quick how RFK ended a speech he gave in 1962 when he was AG. He said to the group, in closing, let me tell you how important I think your work is to the future of our country. History knows no inevitability except as men surrender to their own fears of the future. I salute you and I wish you well in your work. Now today, by contrast, we have Donald Trump calling prosecutors Marxists, scum, savages, and thugs. We have a 5-minute speech on Bobby Knight in Indiana basketball. We have talk about the price of eggs and bacon. We have stuff about Hunter Biden's laptop. We have a riff about Norm Eisen, why I have no idea. We have the fact that probably not a fact, but the claim that firefighters voted for him by 94%. We have mentions of Al Capone, Wyatt Earp, Rudy Giuliani. And then it ends with, I actually thought I was hearing something wrong. YMCA, that song, they played it, and he danced to it on the stage of the Great Hall. It was disgraceful.
Judge, what did you make of it? I mean, yeah. How do you think actually sitting federal judges, who obviously they work for a separate branch, but watching that, what do you think they feel?
You know, it's funny. It's all projection. He seemed to take the opposite position of what you would think on everything. So he said it was so terrible of the media to attack Justice Cannon, Judge Cannon. She's such a wonderful judge. She's brilliant. She was terrific. And the media was so unfair to her. And it's as if he didn't realize what's going on with attacking judges now, calling them traitors, calling them they should be impeached. And his henchmen, Musk, Mike Johnson, et cetera, they are going forward with thinking about impeaching federal judges for making decisions they think are right. So on the one hand, he was so critical of attacking Cannon, and on the other hand, didn't see that it's the flip side. And so that just really stunned me that he didn't see that parallel. And he did that in a couple of other contexts too. He talked about the weaponization of the Justice Department. I can't imagine anything more weaponized than the way he handled that speech as what he called himself, the chief law enforcement officer of the country, as if he's now going to direct the Justice Department, the FBI, what they should do, who they should prosecute. And he went after his enemies list.
I mean, there used to be this sort of agonizing of presidents about, you know, meeting with the head of the Department of Justice, about keeping independence, right. not, you know, the president not influencing stuff. Having a FBI director that stays over for multiple administrations. It could be a Republican, it could be a Democrat. I mean, the idea that there was weaponization, but now there's not going to be. I mean, it's an Orwellian sort of.
Exactly. He gave them the hit list. He told them exactly who he really wants prosecuted, starting with Alvin Bragg, Tish James, and Norman Eisen, Mark Pomerantz. I mean, he laid out a whole list, Biden, of course, and many others. And that was the list. And he's basically sending a message. Go after them. They were not fair to me. They need to be prosecuted.
If I can pick up on that quickly. Look, I was critical of a lot of the Trump prosecutions. Anderson, you know well. I said many times I disagreed with the way some of these cases were charged and tried. That said, think about what Donald Trump's logic here is. He basically stood in front of that crowd and said, I've experienced firsthand. I know how brutal it is when DOJ gets used against you. Now, we're going to do it back to everyone else. I mean, it's a childlike view. It's retributive. He just went on a bender, essentially. It's illogical and it's dangerous.
What I worry about is we're becoming numb to this. Like every day there's some mass.
What do you make of that speech that he gave today? Because there is this question that everything Donald Trump says is outside of the norm, and to some degree that's become normalized. It shouldn't be. But it's more than that. He said things that were not only untrue, but if accepted, compromise our system of laws and governance.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said. I do think it's worth noting something that you picked up on is who was there. And it was not a speech that was given to the career men and women of the Justice Department. This was a hand-selected group of people, some from the department, some not from the department. But that's notable. Normally, when you have an incoming administration, one, the president usually is not there talking to them, but there's nothing that prohibits that, especially if it was going to be a speech about policy. But here it was not given to the sort of ordinary men and women. This was trying to be much more of a campaign speech. And so I don't think that it is reflective of where the department as a whole is. There's still lots of men and women in the department who are there to do the right thing, even if the leadership isn't. Second, everything about the speech conveyed the lack of independence of the department from the White House. And that is what separates us from an autocracy. That independence is a norm, and it's not a law, but that is a norm there is good reason that Republican and Democratic presidents have adhered to that norm because they understand how dangerous it is. That's gone, completely gone. And then the final thing is, it's really notable. They're really, other than the courts, as we were saying as we were waiting for this segment, is other than the courts, there are no checks on this president. You really get the sense that it is so different than the first Trump administration. This, I don't think, could have happened in the first Trump administration. And a good sign of that is today he issued yet another broadside on a defense firm. There's now another firm, Paul Weiss, incredibly eminent firm. He issued it after a judge found unconstitutional the one that he issued just the other day.
Right. He had told the government they can't do business, they have to cancel all their contracts with particular law firms that he's got some beef with.
Right, but here's a president who's like, oh, a court said I can't do it, I'm doing it again. That is what we're dealing with. And so your point that you've got a adjudicated, convicted criminal as the president, you can see it because you have a court that has said you cannot do this, and it is having zero effect on the fact that he just did it again to another respected firm.
There is a chill that is setting in because of the firings, the threats, the law firms, the universities, dropping people's names randomly. You were one of the lucky ones today. Talk to me about that. And I know you're an outward-facing guy. You're out there. You've probably heard a lot of things in your life, a lot of threats. Like journalists, you face a lot of stuff. But talk to me about the effect of these types of things, the naming of people, the going after people, the threatening of people.
Well, it's about the chilling effect.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the strategy now, again, I never like personalizing because I'm supposed to be here analyzing the situation. So leaving sort of me aside, the whole idea is to divide and conquer. If you issue a threat on Covington Burling, a reputable law firm, the idea is all law firms think about it. If you have a threat against a company, then you're sitting there going, well, I don't want to be the next company. I mean, that is a classic tactic of using fear the concern about the fact that this is the leader of the free world taking these steps. That is not a fun thing to be at the other end of it. It can have enormous consequences in terms of business, in terms of reputation, in terms of the work that a university does for its students, for its faculty. And so that's the kind of thing that you have to figure out how to deal with. But the one thing I would say is if you do not unite, if you do not sort of stand your ground together, then you are caving.
Let's talk about the fact that to a large degree, the courts are the only bulwark that we've got. There are people, by the way, let's not forget, people and their votes and their demonstrations and their phone calls. That is actually happening. It's not happening the same as it was in Trump 1.0 with massive rallies, but there are protests going on around this country. But talk to me about how well you think the courts are doing at the moment.
You know what? I think leaving aside the Supreme Court, where we really don't know the answer, but there's signs from the fact that we've had a couple 5-4 decisions that have been against Donald Trump recently, that we are seeing the courts do their job and being fearless in doing that. Birthright citizenship has been sort of resoundingly by Republican-appointed and Democratic-appointed judges saying, can't do it, unconstitutional. The firing of probationary employees, 2 federal judges, both said the exact same thing. You have Beryl Howell saying, you know what, these executive orders fly in the face of the First Amendment.
So guys, that press conference ended in disaster for Trump, right? And the disaster is reverberating so much, it's gone through time and space. It's broken time and space. In many ways, it's still happening today, because the reactions will continue to flow in today, right? Donald has made it clear that he sees himself as a tyrant. He's embracing the tyranny. Remember how he was like, people for not joking, very seriously and correctly said, Trump basically views himself as a monarch. He views himself as wearing the crown and all of that. And a few weeks ago on I think on True Social or wherever, he shared a photoshopped image of him on like a fake Time magazine looking cover wearing a crown saying long live the king, right? And of course it's just a little joke, whatever. But in the context of Trump basically seeing himself as above the rules the peasants, the 99.9% need to follow, then yes, he views himself like a medieval monarch, somebody who is effectively above all law. This is dangerous. And he's making it clear, not just in, actions behind the scenes, but in his words, on camera, on microphone, in 4K, in front of the entire mainstream media and the world, that he views himself as more important and better than you. The idea that all men are created equal, the foundational idea of the United States, at least aspirationally, Trump disagrees with it.